Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to The Black Tower Show. I'm your host, Nathan Ford. Joined here with Jake Fox. We're broadcasting 1310 WRSB, Rochester, New York, upstate New York, and it's a cold day today. I thought we were going to get a little bit of that spring, summer weather, but unfortunately we got to wait a little longer. Our guest, Dr. Courtney Brown, director and founder of the Farsight Institute, nonprofit research and educational organization dedicated to the study of a phenomenon of non-local consciousness known as remote viewing. We've talked about it on the show. Me and Jake have discussed remote viewing. So we know about it, but I don't want to make any assumptions that our listeners know about remote viewing. But I want Dr. Courtney Brown, he's spent his life involved in not just remote viewing. He's an artist. He's a singer, too. And he's holds degrees from Washington University, professor at Emory University, respected man, and pleasure for being on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your listeners.
That's great. So, like I said before, I don't want to make any assumptions, but I want to go into remote viewing. Let's just talk about what it is and how you came to get involved in that.
Sure. Well, remote viewing is something I do at the Farsight Institute. That's Farsight, like seeing far. And we're the largest nonprofit educational institute venue for remote viewing, scientific remote viewing research anywhere. And our website is Farsight, Farsight.org, because we're a nonprofit. And I do not do any of my remote viewing research at my university. I do it all at the Farsight Institute, so it's separate. But I am an academic, and I approach all of it from the way an academic, a scientist would do it. The remote viewing phenomenon is a mental procedure. It was developed by the United States military during the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and it was officially closed down in a program. It was originally used for espionage purposes, and the idea was to be able to use it to perceive across time and space. The phenomenon itself is a real thing, and in practical matters, the military invested a great deal in it. However, the official program in the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, was different from some unofficial movements in the military which also used it, which later became known as the 1st Earth Battalion, and the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. Men Who Stare at Goats. Now, DIA was Defense Intelligence Agency, that was military intelligence. The Men Who Stare at Goats movie came out of the influence that was found in the Special Forces. All of it was Army. In 1995, in November, they closed down the official program and the DIA and officially kicked it out of the military. But that didn't mean the military stopped doing it. It's just that it became public, and so it was a bit of an embarrassment, a political storm, and so they closed it down, and everyone that I know, who knows anything about this, assumes and to some extent has information, but I can't talk about a very real ongoing program that is much bigger, much bigger than the previous one. And if that ever becomes public, they will close that one down and say, "Oops, must have been a rogue general. Don't know how that happened," and they would start up another one. So they want it's something that in practical matters is of great interest to military. However, I am a civilian. And I am the leading civilian scientist that studies the subject of remote viewing, the phenomena of remote viewing, using the procedures that were developed by or derivative of the structured data collection procedures used by the military and developed by the military. I can say that I'm the leading scholar in this subject because I am the only scholar, so it's a bit of a joke. But I have published peer-reviewed articles, books on the subject, and so on. And so there's a tremendous amount of information. We are a worldwide. I work with a worldwide network of remote viewers, literally across the entire world, and they're the best military-grade remote viewers that exist anywhere. We don't know the exact capabilities of the current military remote viewers, but the people I work with, I assume, are as good or better.
We're talking to Dr. Courtney Brown, director and founder of the Farsight Institute, here on the Black Tower Show. Can you go a little bit more into how do you find people that have this ability?
Oh, no, that's very important. Everyone has the ability. It's a trained process. See, originally you were talking about psychics who sometimes perceived something accurately and sometimes didn't. And then they found some psychics who were able to figure out what their minds were doing when they were perceiving these things accurately. And those psychics were people like Ingo Swann, who was an artist, and Dr. Richard Ireland. Ingo Swann had his influence in the DIA program, and Dr. Richard Ireland had his influence in the unofficial movement in Special Forces, which later became known as the 1st Earth Battalion. And so what basically happened is they figured out what their minds were doing, and then they taught it. And so it's a mental procedure for perceiving things, events, people, places, whatever, across time and space. Now, this is in total violation of the accepted paradigms of both Newtonian and relativistic physics. So that's one of the reasons it's been so difficult to get mainstream science to accept it, because as soon as you accept that the phenomenon, even the smallest element of the phenomenon is real, then you have to basically the entire house of cards of the solidity of relativistic physics and Newtonian physics just falls apart. And so,
to Dr. Courtney Brown, director and founder of the Farsight Institute. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, it's okay.
Broadcasting WRSB 1310. Here in talking to Dr. Courtney Brown about remote viewing. So continue on.
So remote viewing itself is in dispute in the mainstream scientific community, but it is not in dispute among people, even within high realms of the government, who have any awareness of it whatsoever. And this goes all the way up to cabinet people. And so it's very similar to the situation that we have with the extraterrestrial phenomenon, where as you have mainstream physicists arguing ferociously that there's speed limitation with regard to the speed of light, and nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, and thus that there are no aliens that could possibly be here because it would take them forever to get here. And then you have military people who are within some realms of the military, in active contact with extraterrestrials who work with them. And and some of the generals, I have been told point blank, and I work with some of these military people, some of the generals point blank are really sort of amazingly frustrated at the physics community, how resistant it is, because here we have them ferociously yelling at each other that the laws, quote unquote, of physics have not been violated with this experiment or that experiment. There's still the relativistic limitation of the speed of light. And at the same time, we have ships flying all over the place. And, they obviously get here in complete violation of the speed of light limitations. And the generals just sort of roll their eyes. They really just don't understand the physics community, or a lot of the mainstream scientific community. The problem is very similar in archaeology, for example. If you read Michael Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, you'll see that the stuff that we're taught in schools about archaeology is taught in such a way that it looks like a cement block, like it's got to be real, it's just there. And then when you read Michael Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, you realize it's just a house of cards. None of it's correct. It's just garbage. And so you realize that there's evidence of anatomically correct humans going back millions and millions and millions and millions of years, yet all of this information has been suppressed. Now, archaeology basically says that human populations sort of burst out into almost broad daylight just a few thousand years ago, and that there were no anatomically correct humans, more than just a few tens of thousands of years ago. But that's just not what the archaeological evidence has. There's tremendous numbers of anomalies that are simply repressed, and it's not repressed because the archaeologists are evil. It's repressed because these ideas run into a very severe psychological problem, a psychological block, and people are unwilling to accept these things. For example, I'll give you a real-time example. I don't know what your age is, but up until 1995, the mainstream astronomical community was absolutely almost 100% in uniform, shouting the same thing. There are no other planets around any other stars anywhere in the universe, not just our realm of the galaxy, but anywhere ever, and that there were no other planets. Now, if you look at the current issue of Science magazine, put out by the AAS, they have a little bit of a article about the discovery of exoplanets, and they mention the 1995 date, but they mention it. They fudge in my opinion, they fudge it completely. They say things like we knew they were out there. With just evidence had to be waiting. It couldn't be any different. I mean, as soon as we realized that our star was our sun was a star, and then we finally found one in 1995. Well, that's not at all what happened. What happened was that the astronomical community was screaming at the top of their lungs, there are no other planets anywhere. And they were making extremely, strong arguments saying the probability of a planet existing anywhere is so extreme, so small, that it just can't happen. The conditions have to be so completely correct. And so sort of the whitewashing that you get of history when things change is sort of amazing. But really what did happen was the first exoplanet or planet around another star was discovered in 1995, and now we discover a few a week. And now we found that there's many Earth-sized planets in our neighborhood. And now, what could they have actually done before 1995? Well, the reality is we had a sample of one. All of science is based on statistics. And we had a sample of one, our own solar system. And that solar system had 9 major planets, an asteroid belt, comets, meteors, junk, lore all over the place. And how in their right mind could they have possibly said, with a sample of one with all that stuff around it, that no other planets exist anywhere in the whole universe? So really what you say is it wasn't a scientific statement at all, because the only prediction they could have made was a mean. MEAN, the mean, the average, and the average at that time was one sample, one solar system, and that one had 9. So the only scientifically defendable answer at that time could have been that the average must have been around 9 planets around every sun. So, but under no conditions could they have scientifically actually argued that there were no planets anywhere in the universe. Yet that's what was being made. And so really what we had was a scientific argument that was based on emotions, on psychology. And that's what we have now with remote viewing.
Excuse me one second. We're talking to Dr. Courtney Brown, director and founder of the Farsight Institute. Go to www.farsight.org. And I just want to take a minute and I want to go back to remote viewing because listening to your wonderful words here, and this is a great interview. And it's a pleasure to have you on the show, but I have one question about remote viewing, and it's this. What is the connection between, how does someone's personal consciousness meet up, say, because when you're doing these tests, you have sites, or you might have a place or a person. Can you talk about where my consciousness meets that place? How can my consciousness be connected with a place that I've never been before? I know that's a difficult question, but if you could bring it down.
No, it's not. That's what I do. If you ask a plumber how to fix a pipe, you can say, I know it's a hard thing because I can't figure out how to fix that pipe. The plumber will look at you and say, that's what he does.
It's hard to explain it in a way that everybody can understand.
That's what I do. So let me explain. Remote viewing transfers information perceptually, meaning a remote viewer with no information whatsoever about what we call a target, which is the thing that is supposed to be described. The remote viewer, say, goes into a room, closes the door, has no information whatsoever. The remote viewer, she or he, just simply knows that there's something to be described. They sit down at a table with a pen and a stack of paper, and an hour later come out with 10 to 20 pages of detailed information describing that thing. So they always work under totally blind conditions. It actually doesn't even work if you have any information prior. You have to go under totally blind conditions in order to circumvent the conscious mind intervention and so on. So these perceptions are vague and foggy and fuzzy, but a trained remote viewer can sort them out and have really great sketches and descriptions of everything. And again, it can be of anything in the past, present, or future. So the question is, how does it actually work? Okay, now we go into a little bit of the science of this thing. And this is one of the reasons that it is so difficult for the mainstream physics community to wrap their heads around it. There is no evidence anywhere in any physics experiment whatsoever that mass actually exists, that solid things actually occur, that there are real solid type anything. For example, you're looking at a desk or a computer screen or a radio or whatever, and it looks real to you. That's just an illusion. There's nothing real in that. There's nothing space. There's nothing solid in that. Then you can say, well, what if you break it apart inside that mass? There's molecules and atoms and subatomic particles. Well, when the physicists break those things apart, they break into smaller and smaller pieces. But at no point do those smaller and smaller pieces become solid billiard ball type things that are indivisible, that are solid. What they are on the quantum level is they are energy. Now, E equals mc squared. C squared is a speed of light constant. So it's energy equals mass. So energy and mass are the same thing. So basically what it is that all physical things are actually forms of energy. And on the quantum level, we describe them in terms of waveforms, wave packets. And so a thing, a particle, say a photon or a neutron or any subatomic particle, is a wave packet. And what those wave packets are is there are groups of waves that combine together in a principle known as the superposition principle, where you have peaks and waves, peaks and troughs, the high points and the low points of the waves interacting under principles of constructive and destructive interference, such that they produce things. And what you and I are, and our radios and our TVs and our computer consoles and our desks and our couches and our cars, what we are what we call superposition ensembles, which is large collections of these interacting waves, and each subatomic particle is a collection of these waves producing a wave packet. And all of us are massive ensembles of these collections. And so basically what it is that these waves work together when they have similar wavelengths, when they're close together. For example, let's go up to a keyboard on the piano and bang on middle C, and then bang on B right next to middle C. You'll hear a beat frequency, which is between the two. So it'll be like this is where the frequencies interfere with each other. So it'll be like a wah, 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 wah sound. So that's what's happening when waves interfere with one another. They produce what they call beat frequencies. Well, these interference processes don't work so easily. They do work. They're still there, but they're not so noticeable. They're nothing to write home about if the keys are very far away. So if you hit middle C and then hit the highest B on the keyboard, you won't really hear that beat frequency. There will be some interference going on, but it's just nothing to write home about. So when the frequencies are close, that's when the interference really is something you want to talk about. And so what happens is we have, and when we're looking at each other, well, all of the frequencies that compose us are somewhat similar. You might say, in a term that comes out of Star Trek, that they have a quantum signature or an average wave frequency. So what you have is the waves that matter in terms of the interference processes that produce the manifestations of us sort of gel around an average frequency, and that's what makes us. Now, if you have similar ensembles that have an average frequency that's higher or lower. Let's call that average frequency our constant, our quantum signature that's higher or lower. We just won't see them. We'll be out of phase with them. They'll be invisible. They'll be as real as us, but they just will not exist as far as our reality is concerned.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have one question. So, people, when you're talking about people's frequencies, are you saying that someone who is developed the remote viewing, they're working at, say, a higher frequency that's more in tune with...
No. What I'm saying is when a remote viewer does their work, what the training process is that the mind is like a radio. And just like a radio tunes into a frequency, it has the capability of tuning into other frequencies. Okay. But the mind, you might call it, the brain, is a very complex, highly advanced hologram generator. So out of all of the frequencies that are available to it, it screens out absolutely everything, and the only thing you see is the here and now that you're looking at. And so, but the other stuff still exists. And so what training in remote viewing does is it trains the mind to be able to tune into other frequency ensembles that you normally don't see. And so when you're actually remote viewing, on the level of physics, what's actually happening is the remote viewer's mind is tuning in to frequency ensembles that are normally invisible to it.
Let me interrupt one. So when you have a site, say you give somebody like a site that they're looking at, so that material place you're saying gives off a frequency because it is energy, like you said, energy and mass.
Yes.
And so that specific wave comes from that place that you give the person, and then the person's able to be kind of like a radio and pick up that wavelength that's traveling, through space and time.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, in the sense that most of what you said is correct, but no in the sense of traveling. Once you tune in to a frequency, you are there. You are in a state of superposition with that frequency. Remote viewers don't pick up stuff like a radio wave from one place and bring it to another, and sort of like you're picking up a radio frequency from Manhattan, but you're in Upper New York State. It's not like the radio frequencies are moving over there. What the remote viewers actually do is when they tune into a frequency ensemble, some other place, they're actually merging with that place. And so the remote viewer is actually becoming part of the superposition ensemble or the frequency collection of that other place. In fact, it's even gotten to the point where we do have recorded experiences where remote viewers have, under totally blind conditions where they could not have known anything about it, have actually seen other remote viewers at the site. And they did not know that other remote viewers had been given that same target at another time. So that you actually become part of the site. You, in a sense, merge with it to some extent, enough so that impressions of that get formed in your brain.
So is your consciousness there as well? When people are removing, their consciousness is at the place, you're saying? That's how it works. So you see how this understanding of physics is so much different than what we normally get in school. Normally what we get in school is that the solid stuff... They weren't talking about this stuff in school.
Yeah, and still to this day, if you take physics courses, I mean, if you come into physics courses 50 years from now, they won't even look like what you're getting today. What physics is taught today is that the solid material world is fixed, and it is a single reality around which there are no other realities. There is just that one. And in fact, physicists themselves have argued about this. There was a graduate student. A couple graduate students walking with a well-known physicist in a famous setting, and the graduate student looking at all the quantum mechanical stuff. And all of macro world is based up on aggregations of quantum stuff. So the graduate student was sort of saying, well, then how do we actually know that we're real? I mean, if the quantum stuff is just sort of existing in a probabilistic ether, and it doesn't even materialize until you get to the large stuff, how do we know that we're really real? And the physicist, the big guy, he stubbed his toe and he said, well, I know we're real because I felt that. That hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the type of... But the reality is much more complicated. The illusion wouldn't work if it wasn't so good. It's really good. And that's why it's so convincing. And so physicists to this day are in a situation of trying to defend this illusion as the reality. But we're not too far away from being able to create machines that can do what the human mind can do with remote viewing, which is to tune into other things. Eventually we'll get to the point where we'll have things put up on computer monitors.
So you're saying a computer could possibly do that
for sure.
task? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if we can do it with the human mind, then technology can also do it. And that explains...
the consciousness part of it, a computer would never be able to experience it.
Well, we can do it. There's a whole bunch of different ways it could happen. You could map the actual visual signals coming into a remote viewer's mind and project it onto a computer screen. That was done in the movie Minority Report starring Tom Cruise. The other way is you could just simply figure out what the physics are, the underlying physics, and just simply build machines that can see and project onto the screen what's going on at a certain frequency quantum signature place. So I mean, eventually we'll get to that technology, but we don't really need to worry too much about it. Actually, in regard to this, if I could actually make a small plug, we have a newsletter that we almost never send out, once every couple months or something, but we're going to be sending out a couple, and it's free. And we're going to be sending out a couple announcements, big time, about projects we've been doing in June. And so if your radio listeners would like to get our free newsletter, that would be a really good idea. And so the free newsletter, you get to it by going to farsight.org, www.farsight.org, O-R-G. And then with the go to the bottom of the nav bar on the left and click on the big thing that says sign up for the newsletter. But we're going to be putting out some very big announcements, really, really big. One has to do with a project we call the Atlantis Project. You know, is as crazy as this may sound to people who sort of are not familiar with it, there really, really, really was a technologically advanced civilization on Earth within the last 100,000 years. And it was us. It wasn't like some alien civilization somewhere else. It really was us. We have really good physical evidence, archaeological evidence. We know where the ruins are, and we have the whole remote viewing story of what happened to them on the last moments. We know the whole story of what happened to them, and they were technologically very advanced, and it was science gone bad. And yes, there are governmental and mainstream issues with regard to not wanting this out, but we did it on our own with some of the best remote viewers on the planet, and that type of information is coming out. And there's really good archaeological evidence of things like this as well. So anyway, so those types of announcements we're coming out with, and it's going to happen in June. And so
go to farsight.org. Dr. Courtney Brown, our guest on the Black Tower Show. We're fans of Cliff High. We've had him on the show. We've actually interviewed Cremo as well. And you know, when we're talking to Cremo, it makes you realize that we do live in this very narrow view of the world. You know, we're talking about, you know, the technology that was there 100. I mean, you tell people and they look at you a little funny, and you know. But Cliff High, when he talks, he talks very, very highly of you, and I know that for him there was some. You made some predictions from Cliff High and his life and those sort of things, but the way he talks about remote viewing and moving forward, he talks a lot about a coastal event that is going to be happening. And,
actually, yeah. Now I like Cliff a lot. He's a great guy. He calls it the global coastal event. However, that's not what we call it. We never made any predictions. We have a remote viewing project called the Climate Project that spans the year 2008 to 2013, June 1st on either one, on both of those years. And for that 5-year span, all the remote viewing was done back in 2008 under really squeaky clean scientific conditions with total randomization of everything, under totally blind conditions with public verification of the remote viewing data collection process using methods of encryption. It was very complicated, but it was very interesting. And we have remote viewing sessions that do indicate a very significant amount of difficulty. challenges on the planet for June 1st, 2013. Now, it's not a prediction. It's a experiment. We don't know what's going to happen. But secondly, much of the information, if you understand the issue of what we've all been talking about with quantum signatures and the energy essential nature of reality, then you would understand that it's possible to have alternate timelines, infinite numbers of alternate timelines. Many. I mean, for example, anything that changes with respect to quantum, with respect to the frequency collection, will be invisible to us. And so it is possible for there not only to be a past, present, and future that we can perceive, but also for there to be an infinite variety of past, present, and futures. And so when remote viewing the past, we don't have a problem picking the particular timeline that we want. But remote viewing the future has always been a problem, because when you go into the future, you really don't know what your timeline you want to look from. So you can sort of get almost anything. And so we have been trying to crack that nut for the longest time, to be able to see into the future and make some understandable descriptions of stuff that's out there, even if it's impossible to describe an exact particular timeline, because according to the theory, at every moment of now, you fork off into infinite numbers of futures. So there really is no way to predict the future, because from the moment of now, you're forking off into many futures. So what future are you going to go to? There's no one future you can predict. However, for big things that affect large swaths, or almost all future trajectories, then we should be able to note those things. And this project, the so-called climate project, did by accident run across what apparently was meteor interactions with the planet, as well as many, climate. Yeah, and basically what we had already happen in February, mid-February, there was a large meteor that interacted with Russia. And then there was also a large asteroid that barely missed the planet, DA-14. Now, the trouble with multiple realities or alternate timelines is that it's very easy to fork yourself off into another timeline. If you bring any information back from the future to the present, if you do anything different, you're going to get a different future. That's exactly why the military wanted to use, or wants to use, remote viewing, because they want to see a terrorist event, for example, and then arrest the terrorist before they do it, and prevent it. So obviously you're seeing one timeline and then preventing yourself from going down that timeline. So both timelines exist, but then if you're trying to use future prediction to prove the reality of remote viewing, which is stupid, because we use remote viewing easily with present and past targets, so that should be enough. But if you want to discuss how to do it with the future, you've got that problem of changing timelines. And with the meteor impacts that showed up in the data, or appeared to show up in the data, we have the problem that's the following. In the meteor that was over Russia, for example, now we do know that the government looks at our remote viewing projects with great interest and closely. We know that for a fact. I won't go into how I know this for a fact, but I do know for sure that they do that. I mean, even on our...
Because you're on the no-fly list, maybe?
No. Our board of directors has retired military people on it. I mean, we are not at all... We work with these kind of guys. Right. And we're friendly. So... But the basic idea is that if you looked at the videos that were taken of the meteor that came in over Russia, that was very interesting, because the meteor exploded over Russia. It fragmented and exploded. And if you look closely at one of the videos that came in, fortunately we are in a day where these video cameras are everywhere. And one of the videos that had been shown, and it's widely visible on YouTube, is that the meteor, as it was coming in and as it was in the atmosphere, something approached it from behind, like a missile or projectile of some type, hit it, blew it up, fragmented it, and blew pieces of it in front of it. I mean, all over the place. That's why it didn't hit as a solid lump on Russia and cause what would equivalent of a huge atomic explosion. So something blew it up. Now, there's only three things that could have happened. Either it was another meteor coming in and it actually hit that meteor exactly at that spot. Now, mainstream science says that the chance that DA-14, the asteroid that almost missed, that barely missed Earth on that same 24-hour period, and the one that came in at Russia, both coming in within the same 24-hour period to be close to Earth, the chance of that happening is 100 million to 1. Now, what's the probability that another meteor would have come in and exactly hit the Russian meteor right over Russia just before it impacted? That kind of aim is incredible. The probability of that happening is so small it doesn't happen. So that had to have been either an anti-ballistic missile system, perhaps space-based, that came from Russia, United States, or extraterrestrial. And because what we have is a situation with governments are in contact with extraterrestrials, and if they saw our climate project stuff and the clear description of the stuff in it, what would you have done if you were one of them? You would have gone to the extraterrestrial contacts you had and said, this is going to happen according to this stuff. Take care of this. And, the ETs could have done that. But the very fact that it happened just in the nick of time, just as the meteor was entering the atmosphere over Russia, right before it hit, that meant that whoever did it had to be ready for it. I mean, they were like, with the guns loaded, ready to shoot. That happened. There was almost no time to react at all. So whoever did it had to act really quickly to do that. And so that type of information is something I can't prove, because you'd actually have to have governmental people sort of come out and fess up to the whole thing, and then the whole house of cards would collapse. And they're not going to, if it was extraterrestrials, they're not going to confess to something like that. The extraterrestrial issue is not going to be resolved until it becomes a big deal with respect to the amnesty issue. Meaning the cover-up and activities that have gone on with the extraterrestrial stuff since 1947 has been so extensive and so severe that the people involved are simply not going to do anything until a total amnesty is granted. I mean, that's just not going to happen until then. So we're going to have to deal with that amnesty issue before the public sort of gets the whole story. And it's delicate. It's how do you actually bring up the amnesty issue without opening up the whole house of cards in the first place? But that's going to have to happen.
Could you explain extraterrestrial influence on, say, humans' ability to remote view? Are you saying that the extraterrestrials have they've created that ability within us, and even in relation to understanding different dimensions of time and space?
Well, the extraterrestrials know all about this, and they know all about remote viewing, and the ones that we are aware of are extremely supportive of human experiments with and growth in the area of remote viewing. They see that, as I understand it, as a big connector between us and them, meaning is that remote viewing is a bridge that allows us to conceptualize the entire extraterrestrial issue. Because, to them, that this whole level of technology and consciousness is what their reality is. And so for us, we're living in sort of a dream world reality that's more Disney than anything else. And they're waiting for us to make that connection. And the remote viewing phenomenon opens up all sorts of realms of physics and other things that make them less scary to us and more understandable to us. And it makes open contact possible. So the remote viewing is really important to the ET agenda. You really can't have the ET agenda work if you simply stick with the idea that there's only one physical reality with speed of light limitation. If you're going to stay in that kindergarten of idea collection, then the whole stuff just won't stick together, and you won't be able to deal with the extraterrestrials. So they're really looking for the remote viewing thing to be a fundamental component of the way humanity works, thinks of sort of existence moving forward. And then the extraterrestrial thing no longer becomes a big deal.
I'd like you to take a few steps back and discuss what you were saying about the amnesty issue. What is that exactly?
Well, there's been a cover-up since 1947, since the Roswell crash, and it's been a very seriously done one, meaning it wasn't just the discrediting of people. I mean, there's lives have been lost. I mean, they really pursued it with full force. And at some point, it was carried on with, well, they eventually realized it was so relatively easy to keep going. They eventually started to say really stupid things like UFOs that were sighted were swamp gas. And even the creator of the swamp gas idea laughs at it now, and he has publicly confessed that he was the creator of it in a Washington briefing that happened just a week or so ago. And they said, the public would believe anything. They didn't want to really face the extraterrestrial thing, so anything we told them, they'd believe. Now, the swamp gas thing was a little bit too much. They didn't go for that one. So that was sort of the edge of believability. But almost anything else works. And so there have been lots of physical things that have happened to people. A lot of there have been some deaths. There's been a lot of stuff that's gone on, and a lot of information has been. It's not supposed to be legal for the United States government to fake news stories and get involved. I mean, you're talking about collaboration on the level of high levels of government, both spying on people, but also influencing information they get, and also affecting profoundly the mainstream media, so that they say the story that the government wants them to say, and all of that governmental involvement, mainstream media involvement, I mean everything. It covers the whole swath of our society. Would have to come out. And the governmental and military people that have been involved in particular are extremely sensitive to the amnesty issue, meaning they don't want this house of cards to collapse and have anything happen to them. So, I mean, you're talking about a public outroar that would dwarf almost anything in past history. And so, and the public is very volatile, and the military and governmental people in particular are frightened to death of what would happen. So they keep the story going. However ridiculous it keeps on going, they just keep it going because they don't really know how to get around it. So the extraterrestrials that actually do want to push the issue, and people like myself and others that I work with regard to the remote viewing stuff, that sort of realize that we have to move forward. We really are between a sort of a rock and a hard place. So we put more information out there, and slowly the climate is changing. And also some of the older military people are retiring and dying, the ones who are most seriously implicated in problems. And to some extent, the thought process of the sort of governmental thinking has been, let as many of those people get old and die as possible before we come out with this. So partially it's that. But on the other hand, we are entering into a realm of great challenges as a species on this planet. And it would be greatly beneficial for this to happen sooner rather than later. So, and those are the issues that we're facing. I mean,
what are your thoughts on different religious practices that focus, that tend to look within? So we have to look at our own, like we can't contain our greed, and we are, we are these people that have many issues. But you're talking about something that's kind of different. You're talking about, well, people have this ability; they just need to be awakened to it, and there's not, does morality play into this? How could we use our skills of, if we have remote viewing skills, to kind of help each other in a way, make this, the social part of our lives better? Do you talk about that? Is there any kind of quality there?
Well, first of all, I like religions. I've been a member of most of them, and I've never unbecome a member of any of them. So I've been everything. Tactically you'd say I was a Catholic now, but I've also been a Jew, a Muslim, a Buddhist. I meditate 2.5 hours a day in the manner of a Hindu to this day. I mean, so, I think there's some good stuff to be found out of all of them. However, they all have an attempt. They've all have made an attempt to sort of wrap their heads around what they did perceive intuitively to be a greater reality than just the physical stuff that they see. The trouble is that when human personalities get involved in these glimpses of the greater reality, there is a desire to control, and to control the masses. And so you get hierarchies that set up within religion. So, for example, just to pick on the Catholic Church for no good reason whatsoever, they have a very strict and rigid hierarchy. They have a way of looking at the world. They have a dogma. They have a canon. They have a way of seeing things, and you have to have faith in it. So you take the experimental aspects, you take the surprise aspects, you take the unusual things, you take them completely out of the religious point of view, and you make it into a set of beliefs, and you must believe those exact things or else. And so that is very different from the original spiritual experience that starts any of these religions, for example. And so what would basically happen with the opening up of the awareness on the planet of the existence of remote viewing and even the existence of the extraterrestrial life is the house of cards for all of these religions would come to a complete collapse. For example, there is a remote viewing project that I conducted with one of the best military-grade remote viewers that exists on the planet Earth, Daz Smith. And it was considered so controversial that the board, remember, I am the chief guy on the board of directors of the Farsight Institute, but the board actually turned it down as an official project at the Farsight Institute because it was considered, and they voted it down because it was just too controversial. But I conducted a project using a remote viewer that had worked with many of our projects. He's one of the best on the planet, Daz Smith, on the Crucifixion issue, just a drama of the crucifixion of Jesus. And basically I was testing a hypothesis that came out of the Seth material, of the Seth books. Seth was an entity that was channeled by Jane Roberts during the 60s, 70s, early 80s, and produced 11 books. Original communications and manuscripts are held in the Yale University's Manuscripts and Archives Division. I mean, it's the granddaddy of all stuff. Most channelers I have a lot of problems with, but there are some great ones that are really unusual. And Jane Roberts is the biggest of all of them. And her stuff is so unbelievably interesting and so unbelievably wise that there were some comments in one of her books called Seth Speaks about the crucifixion drama. And we had to test. I was just too intrigued by it. I originally just dismissed it. I said, this is so stupid. And then but I was bugged by it because, I also sing, and I had been a cantor, the main cantor in the Basilica, in fact, here in Atlanta. I'd sung in operas in the village. I've been a cantor in the Catholic Church for years. I just didn't want to face the thoughts that were coming out of this Seth material. But I finally said, let me just look at it. And so I assigned a bunch of targets to Daz Smith under totally blind conditions. He went in, did the whole normal stuff he does, and it confirmed absolutely everything in the Seth material, and nothing in the Bible was confirmed with regard to what actually happened during the crucifixion. So basically what the findings are, if they are correct, the crucifixion did occur, there was a crucifixion, but it wasn't Jesus. It was actually a stand-in. Meaning the disciples actually knew that, they weren't dumb. Authorities in those days killed people that amassed large followings. And they knew that the authorities were going to arrest Jesus. And so Judas, as well as one or two others, a very few others, made a conspiracy. They said, we got to do this and get, fix the day. They had someone with a mental disorder who was following along in the crowd who thought he was the Messiah. And they went to them, and they went to him and said, hey, you're right, you're the guy, you're the man. By the way, we need a sacrifice. Were you willing to do this? And the guy, he was not well. He said, okay. And they drugged him. They had drugs of some types back in those days too. And so they drugged him so he wouldn't feel as much pain. That's why he didn't answer back when they asked when he was asked questions. And Judas's role was to lead the authorities to this guy so that they would not pick up the real Jesus, and Jesus was somewhere else. And Judas actually turned out to be one of the bravest people in the history of humanity. You might consider Judas very similar to the character of Snape in Harry Potter stuff, where Snape looked like he was the bad guy, but in the reality he was the guy that was, leading Voldemort in the wrong direction. Well, Judas was that kind of a guy, and so he led the authorities, and that's why Peter denied him 3 times, because Peter was not in on the conspiracy. He didn't know the guy. He really didn't know the guy. And so, and the whole story, the entire drama, where Jesus was, who this other guy was, what his mental state was, everything, what Judas was, and how Judas died. He didn't. The Bible has 2 ideas for how Judas died. He went into a field and fell down, and his bowels gushed out. And then the other one, they had him hanging himself. None of that happened. And so we found out actually what really did happen. He actually was arrested and held in a military confinement, and that's where he had his ends. He was killed. So, I mean, the authorities must have known.
That is incredible. I mean,
but
you're talking about the impact of that. Jesus didn't die for
I know,
sins.
and we have it. I put that out as a DVD, and the first 20 some odd minutes of it are available free on YouTube, so that no one buys it without knowing what it's about. And if you go to it has its own website, since we couldn't put it out on Farsight's website because the board voted it down. By the way, they voted it down without ever seeing it. They voted it down just simply because it was too controversial. And but the website is www.crucifixionruse, R-U-S-E. And remember, crucifixion is spelled with an X. So it's crucifixionruse.com.
What type?
And they can the Amazon. It sells on Amazon, and you can see much of the video, 20 minutes of it, and it's a fascinating story. Once you see Daz he actually is on the video, and you actually see him talk about. It is bone chilling.
Yeah.
What type of methods do you use to go back to see in the past?
Well, basically, we have been using. There are many methodologies that are used. They're all structured data collection procedures that are either the exact ones that are developed by the military or they're derived from those methods. Meaning, there's been advancements since those days. But the ones that we have been using over the last few years mostly are the 2 types called CRV, or controlled remote viewing, and then another type called HRVG, or methods that are coming out of the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild. And CRV has a DIA origin, and the HRVG has a Special Forces origin, and so on. There are other methods such as SRV, and some of the CRV viewers have been learning advanced SRV, which uses templates. But to get there's very few people who can do this type of thing. That's actually a problem we have to deal with in the very near future, getting more people to be able to do this. It's trainable, but the level of discipline and the level of time and effort required to do this well.
Do these people sometimes work and get paid for some of the work that they're doing?
Very rarely. Sometimes it does happen, but most of these people are volunteers, which is a problem. Because they have to fit it in with their regular day job, and there's only so much you can dedicate to a hobby. It's like playing the piano. We don't yet have a situation where people go to Carnegie Hall and get paid for making a concert. So, but if you wanted to be of that level, anybody can go and bang on the piano. But if you want to play in Carnegie Hall, you've got to devote a lot of time and energy to it, and it's hard when you're trying to handle the day job, especially when the rest of the world is laughing at you. It's you.
Yeah, but don't you think a lot of people would want to know, like, they would pay these people to do, to tell what may happen in their own lives? They are amazingly good at it. People would probably pay millions of dollars to have that done.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised. First of all, there's not that many people that are that good, and secondly, all of their minutes that are available are fit in between their day jobs, and they spend as much time as they can doing it. So the ones that we work with are people like Dick Allgaier. He used to be just retired as a celebrity.
I was just going to talk about him because I'm looking right now. If you go to farsight.org, I'm looking at remote viewing the future with a tasking temporal outbounder, and you can actually look at some of these sketches.
Oh, we put everything up on the web,
and
so
it's
everybody.
this is fascinating. Like a tornado in Mena, Arkansas. So that was one of your targets, correct?
Yeah, and actually, he did the session a month before the tornado happened, and the tornado target was picked a month after that. It was a time experiment that we did to sort of see if we could isolate timelines, and it was absolutely spectacular. And his tornado drawings are not ambiguous. I mean, he gives a schematic diagram of the tornado to the detail, where the rain droplets were going. I mean, it's...
Do they know? Does he know that it's going to be a place?
Yeah, we always have targets that have something in it, a huge chunk of it that's totally verifiable. Meaning we don't send them out to a target like God or something like that. I mean,
sure.
We don't send them to a target that's totally unverifiable. You can never find out anything. Something has to be absolutely solid, and that we can compare the remote viewing data to that thing. So it's not that they couldn't remote view things that are, unverifiable, but that we have no way of knowing if it's right or wrong. So you don't waste the time doing that. So we can go after, say, a base on Mars, but we have to have, as we did with our Mars Anomaly project, we have to have a picture from NASA, JPL, Malin Space Science Systems that's really clear of something that looks really weird, and we did that with the Martian Anomaly. We had a project that was involving a spray. It turned out to be a refuse spray coming out of a nozzle connected to a pipeline going into a dome, and it's clear as day in the photograph. I mean, it's not at all ambiguous. And so we sent and there's a really high resolution NASA JPL Malin Space Science System photograph. So we sent the viewers out to it under totally blind conditions. They didn't know anything what they were being sent to, and they replicated everything. Told us to spray the chemical composition of the spray, the pipeline. They drew everything. They drew the domes, and so we have all of that verified because we have a picture of it. And then they did what they always do, which they're trained to see if they see something and they go in. So they went into the domes, and so the into the dome stuff was something that we call speculative because we don't have pictures of inside the dome. But the fact that they got everything on the surface correct leads us to believe that they got the stuff inside the domes correct. By the way, we have all of these sessions are on the web, of course, but we have a DVD that sort of puts it all nicely together for many of these projects. First one is called the Farsight Experiments, Volume 1. And if you go to our website, farsight.org, you see it right there. And then we also have another one coming out on the Atlantis project. That's going to be one that is going to be a really, anyway. If I can do one plug, I really would like. We do not try to get people's attention. We don't wave flags in front of people's head. The only way people find out what we're doing is when we make an announcement on our newsletter, which comes out rarely, like every month or 2 months, every 3 months sometimes. I mean, it's rarely. And so go to the website. Farsight.org, Farsight, like seeingfar.org, O-R-G, because we're a nonprofit. Go to the bottom of the nav bar on the left and click on sign up for the free newsletter. All you have to do is put your name and email address, and bang, you're there.
Do it, Dr.
And we will be having 2 major announcements in June.
Oh, man. Dr. Courtney Brown, thanks so much. Man, we did an hour, but I could keep going. We got to have you back on the show sometime. It'd be great to keep the conversation going. Thank you.
I appreciate. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Take care now.
Take care.
Dr. Courtney Brown on the Black Tower Show.